Today on What Went Wrong, we take a look into the dark future.
Ooh.
Hi, I'm Brett Mauser, and I made a bunch of movies.
Bunch.
And few of them have taken place in the future, in what we would call a future imperfect
world, yeah.
which is more commonly known as a dystopia, which is the opposite of a utopia.
Right.
And this is kind of where that comes from.
Right.
I grew up on these types of films. I remember Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon movies, and the Planet of the Apes, and Soylent Green is made of people. Spoilers.
You blew it up, you bastards.
And they had great twist endings, and they always had these backstories that I found
Fascinating.
just fascinating. I love that. Was one of my
Logan's
favorite
Run
parts
was a
about
good
it.
one like
yeah,
that?
Oh yeah. I always wanted to know how we got to that future.
Yeah.
And which is why one of the reasons that I love, I enjoyed Tag so much. And I was thinking about this earlier today with Tag. And we've talked about the exposition problems and of building a world.
Right.
And I thought about it, and I remember thinking when I was writing that there would be other ways to tell some of these, to get some of this exposition going more the ask don't tell or show don't tell route.
Right.
But once I developed the phone and that dialogue that came about between Hal and Sweetheart. I can say that I voluntarily, consciously chose to take that route of building the exposition because I enjoyed that relationship between those two so much.
Which guns?
All the guns. I want to turn on all the guns in the country.
Of course you do, sweetie. Might I remind you that there are several psychiatrists still available at this time of night?
No.
The only thing you could have done differently with that is, putting things in motion, which of course I know you couldn't do on this film, is you could have had them driving around and her talking while you're seeing the scenes of everything being all f***ed up.
Yeah.
You could have done that. Couldn't do it for operational reasons, and I understand that. But yeah, once you had that relationship between Sweetheart and Hal, it was gold. That was a great. That's one of those weird things you didn't realize was going to happen.
Yeah.
You're like you just kind of did it to be for a funny kind of bit, and it turned into one of the best parts about the movie.
Hey, sweetheart.
Ooh, what can I do for my hunka burning man meat?
I mean, she's on screen for, she's on camera, the hologram's on camera for 2-3 minutes, and the rest she's scattered throughout, but she's just as much of a character in that film as anybody else.
She's Kit.
Yeah. So that was where that world building came into play.
Right.
Now, we created this, I was able to look and I kind of took it where we were, and for those people who are familiar with the Ponders universe know that I borrowed a lot from Green Law, from the Green Conspiracy, and a little bit from Vosad, of course. But it's actually sort of a sequel to 3 different films.
Yeah.
Tag, The Green Conspiracy, and
Vosad.
But that's one of the things that are great about westerns and sci-fi is you put them outside of your current time frame, your current era, and you can delve into social and political themes.
There's things you could do with a time that's not your own, and you can make things more blunt. You can make things that represent other things, but don't exactly. There's ways to do that when you go outside of your own little timeline. When you go outside of your universe into another one, then there's things you can do there that you couldn't do in this one. There's aspects of what was happening in the 1800s or 1700s or 200s that you can then bring forth. And so, yeah, it's a way to tell stories without, treading on toes, even though you're going to step all over them when the time comes. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's an interesting thing about most sci-fi films is you that take place in dystopias or whatnot, is you have maybe an idea or something that's bugging you in present day, which for me, it's a lot of the authoritarian environmentalism and being able to look at it and boil it down to what it really is to me in this time frame, and jump forward 20 years to see what would it be like if we continued down this path, which is most dystopian sci-fi films. You take whether it's anti-global warming, anti-global climate change, worried about population growth, anything, they'll take that aspect of this is the way it is. If we continue down this road, this is where we could end up.
Right.
And something that's very fascinating to me is you look back at a lot of these dystopias, and they revolve around these authoritarian dictatorships. From your Equilibrium to 1984 to
V for Vendetta.
Exactly. And most people in society and culture, the film buffs, just average moviegoer, watches these movies, loves them, and identifies with the hero, and is like, oh, the authoritarian dictatorship must fall. How do we've got to go fight that, fight the corrupt system. And in almost every dystopian that I've ever film that I've ever seen has this happens, and this happens. This is how we get there.
Right.
This is how we got to this world.
Right.
And I look around me today and I see these things happening that we've been preached about. Equilibrium and 1984 and what's the other one with the pills? Brave New World.
Brave New World, yeah.
All these things,
Soma and all that.
Yeah, where it talks about drugging the population in terms of recreational drugs, just to keep their mind numb, and
like legalizing marijuana.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where I'm going with this. Is you're seeing these steps that have been predicted and have been warned about, and people know about them.
Yeah,
and yet here it is in their face. It's happening.
Yeah.
Period. Stop. End of story. It is happening.
Right.
And you have not only do you have people promoting it and being for it, you have the people that 20 years ago were adamantly opposed to this type of stuff. And I'm talking about the liberals, the left. No authoritarian. They always saw the right as the ones that were going to be authoritarian.
Yeah.
They're going to take over the world.
Yeah, and that was like, V for Vendetta. They're the conservatives, Well, it turns out in England right now, it's the progressives. Same thing in Australia. They've basically, when flight crews fly to Australia, they lock you in your rooms. And there's armed guards. Australia. Now, I realize Australians, all they really know how to do is, be criminals, because that's where they came from. So they run home to mama, as it were. So Australians are like that. And there's people that are starting to rebel against it. There's people in England now who want to have gun rights because they see that the government is treading on their rights. They're like, F you, we want to have our gun rights. The liberals, and now we're kind of getting into political discussions more than actual movies, but if you want to look at it, just kind of how it's happening, it's always about power. The idea that a leadership matrix would steer their people into a dystopian world. Oh, that happens in Venezuela. That happens in China. Really? Because you look around the United States and we've got everyone who says, oh, we're not going to have forced vaccination, and now we're having forced vaccination. But they said they weren't. Well, no, they are. And the people who were so adamantly against it under President Trump, well, now they're all for it under President Biden. Why? What you're going to find is the same thing I've found in the world, is the people who will actually fight are usually the people who have already fought. I'm not saying that, talk about veterans themselves. I don't know if anyone who knows any veterans, who's met veterans, understands that we're a rather unruly crowd. We don't like your rules. We don't like the way you want to do things. And we're going to say a lot. And what you're going to find is a lot of the times the people who've actually worked for the government don't trust the government. And I've done many things for many years in the military and as a contractor and even as a pilot for the U.S. government. And let me tell you a thing or two about some of the stuff they do. Okay, the stuff that people think they're going to fight, when it actually comes down to it, they either don't think it's actually gotten to that, or we're not really there, or they don't really know how to fight, or it's just not what they considered for their lives. Okay. Most people think they're going to stand up and be V for Vendetta. Most of them are going to sit there and watch the trains of Jews go by to the gas chambers. They all think they're going to stand up and fight the man and fight the power. Most of them are just going to stand around while people are rounded up and thrown into pits in Sarajevo and shot. Because that's what they do. That's what's actually happened. That's what history tells us. Okay. Now, that's one of the reasons that dystopian movies are so appealing, is because whether or not we realize it, we can see it in ourselves as humans. Okay. Humans as a species are designed genetically to work together to a common goal. That's where our strength is. Okay. In hunting, we're an apex predator because of our relentlessness. That's another thing that we can kind of talk about, is why humans are so scary. For animals of the world, humans are terrifying not because we had guns or not because or anything else. I mean, we were naked apes who couldn't move as fast or weren't as strong as actual apes. Well, how did we get to be so powerful? How did we get to rule the world? We got big brains, and we're also relentless. And we would chase animals for days. And that's how animals died. It wasn't that we could outrun them. So we could run for longer than they could. We could constantly just stay behind them like Jason. Which is one of the reasons Jason is so terrifying, because all of a sudden we're faced with what humans have always been. A relentless, we will not stop, we will not quit. Why Terminator was so frightening, other than just being a machine. Doesn't feel, doesn't care, and is not going to stop until you die. Okay? So for the rest of the planet, of the animals and everything else, we were the Terminator. We were all T-800s chasing them down. Could not run them, but we could just stay on them. We are genetically programmed to think that way. So when we see something that is part of the human experience happening, we find that enthralling. A dystopian world. Because we've seen Germany, we've seen Yugoslavia, we've seen Africa, we've seen the old Roman Empire. We've seen the Peloponnesians, and we've seen the Greeks, and all the great empires of the world go through these rise and falls. Well, right now, America is in a fall. I hate to break it to everybody, but right now, America is in a period of decline. Okay? The military is in decline, not because we're not strong, but because leadership's just not there. The government leadership is definitely not there. The a willingness to fight is absolutely not there. Okay. Well, in the world, there's a vacuum. Someone's going to take it. Mm-hmm. And that's how dystopian worlds exist, is there's a need for something, usually a event of some type, a virus, a disease, a natural disaster, or a war. But something always happens. It leads us to that. Well, then there we are. But they never really talk about how it got to that. How people, oh, it can't happen to me. Oh, they're just rounding up Jews. That's fine. Oh, they're just rounding up homosexuals. That's fine. They're just rounding up retarded people. That's fine. What then I realized is at some point, the Germans are coming for you. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying the Germans, the Nazis are coming for you, and they always do, right? At the end of the day, the Germans came for the Germans. If you look at the last days of World War II, there's a movie called Downfall, which I've talked about before, one of my favorite movies, an actual German movie about the last days of Adolf Hitler, as written down by everybody who was there, including his secretary. And you see the Germans are coming for the Germans. And basically Hitler has said, let the Germans all die. They don't deserve to live. He actually wanted to genocide his own people. He'd already killed all the Jews. He'd killed all the Yugoslavians. He'd killed all the Slavics. He'd killed all the gypsies. He killed all the homosexuals. He killed all the retarded. He killed all the old. Man, f*** it. Let's just kill the Germans. Okay. And understand is the Germans were at the pinnacle of European society back then. And you could see this horrible thing they did and realize those people were not savages. Those people were not, wild, barbarians living in the middle of bumble nowhere. They were Germans living in the heart of Europe who had basically helped to bear one of the great societies that we live in today, the United States. Because, by the way, the German language is the second most prevalent language in the United States, other than English, after Spanish. It's German. There's places in Texas they still speak nothing but German. maybe it's something for people your YouTubers may not know, but there's places in Texas where German is the language they speak at home. How do we reconcile the fact that a modern, intelligent, civilized country that brought us such advances, like Germany, fell into a dystopian nightmare that was killing people on the scale unprecedented before or since? And that's one of the things that you have to look at as a dystopian society, is it can happen today. Everyone thinks the Americans, oh, we would never do that. Really? Because the Germans were us 100 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, just look at Australia. I mean, how different is it?
Yeah.
You know?
Oh, yeah, like Australia, but yet they're locking people up. They're arresting people for being out after curfew. Really? The whole country's on lockdown.
Yeah.
You have no rights in Australia.
One of my last year, one of my relatives, one of my family members had talked about, well, what we should have done when COVID hit was we should have been more like China. Like, really? Locking people up, barricading them in their own houses.
Yeah,
that's what
you come
to do. That's what you see as the right thing to do. I'm going to take a little bit of a left turn here, and I'm kind of out of nowhere, but I want to pose something to you, and your aspect, your perspective on history may be able to answer this. But this is just something that I've been thinking about recently. Do you think that one of the reasons that people fall for that or give into that is and give me some leeway here, their fear of death and their own well-being and whatnot. Mm-hmm. Whereas what I think about is the fear of death perhaps maybe comes from the lack of faith, the lack of God in their lives. And I know we don't really talk a lot about religion on this show, but I do think that that's something important to talk about in discovering whether maybe that is something that is important or not important. But I feel that not being afraid of death and being willing to stand up mm-hmm. is a lot easier to accomplish, and for you to have that courage to stand up if you're not worried about whether there's an afterlife or when I die, it's it, I'm done. That's it. But if you have sort of this, something comes after this, something is out there, or that faith in God, in faith that there is an ultimate good,
right, and
that it's greater than I am, so therefore I need to stand up and protect and fight for what is right and correct. That is one reason that maybe America hasn't until now fallen to the authoritarianism and that dictatorship, because there were people that stood up and said, my life be damned. I believe that this is right, and I have faith in God and a something spiritual out there that's greater than me, and I've got to stand up for this. Could that play into this in any way?
There's a reason that most dystopian societies outlaw religion. The Soviet Union, the Chinese, the state-sponsored in Venezuela, all these things. Communism in general is faith in man, not in God. That's why communists always go after churches. That's why communism and socialism always eschew religion. Because here's the thing. The longest lasting anything in our planet is the Catholic Church. Been around for 2,000 years. 2,000 years. St. Paul's Cathedral, named after St. Paul, who was with Jesus. You have to understand. And so the Catholic Church has been there. The Catholic Church has also been the greatest thing for good. It has also been the greatest force for revolution. Has been one of the greatest forces for science. Now people talk about, the Pope did this, Pope did that. Now here's the thing about religion. I don't want to get too much into religion, right, but I will talk about the history of it. If, as a religious person, if you put your faith in the men of your church, the humanity, okay? If you put your faith in the Pope, you're doing it wrong. If you put your faith in the body of the church, you're doing it wrong. If you put your faith in that men will always do the right thing and people always do the right thing, they're humans, they're fallen. That's the whole point of humanity, is it's fallen. Okay? If your faith is in humanity, you will always be disappointed. If your faith is in God, that is where, I guess you could say, this idea that you have that you're not afraid to die. Okay. Now, the Catholic Church has been around for the longest time. It's been around for 2,000 years. It's not going anywhere anytime soon. They have always been a force for change, a force for fighting the power, fighting the man. Anytime you have someone going against the Catholic Church, you need to wonder something, because I'm not talking about the popes. I'm talking about just the rules of the Catholic, the sacrosanct ideas of the Catholic Church. If you have a leader going against them, you really should ask yourself why. Okay. Now, if he's just not Catholic, that's fine. I understand that. I wasn't Catholic. And I'm not saying that you have to be Catholic to be a good leader. Okay. I'm not saying that a Catholic is a better leader than not Catholic. Okay. We're all men. We all fail. Okay. But if you have no system of faith, and I don't mean that you're not a good person because you don't have faith. You can have an atheist who's still a fantastic person. But generally speaking, and as history has shown us, it's the dystopian worlds, dystopian societies, dystopian ideas, dystopian countries that go after religion, because those that have religion have faith and, more importantly, the ability to organize and resist. That has always been true. And so anytime you see people in a society attacking those who are religious, you need to ask yourself why. What are they saying? What are they trying to do? And the left, the progressives, the communists, the socialists, I'm not saying the Democrats, but I mean, they have always attacked the church. Whenever the Pope says that, President Biden shouldn't receive the Eucharist because he's for abortion, everyone attacks the Catholic Church. Really? You think it's a good idea? That's what you want to do? Okay. Join the club. The Nazis, the Romans, everyone's tried it. Go ahead, try. The Russians gave it a go, but it didn't work out for them either. Because whether or not it's about having faith that makes you more willing to resist, I do know that someone who has a religious, who has developed their sense of self and their sense of right and wrong based upon religious principles is, historically speaking, more likely to resist a dystopian, leftist, or right, Nazis too, even though they were democratic socialists, but, they were a little bit right-wing. They are more willing to resist, and throughout history you have seen people of faith, and not just Catholics, Buddhists and Shinto. You've seen them resist. In Japan, the Shinto, they were resisting what was going on with what Japan was doing. It's always them. Okay. Does that mean that they don't fear death? I don't know. Maybe. I don't fear death, but that's a different concept. My religion plays into that, but it's more than just that. Because I know a lot of people who are religious who are terrified of dying. Yeah. Okay. But what I will say is what I've said several times. Them that have religion, or them that are a part of a religion, are more likely to resist. History has shown that.
So where do you think the lack of realization of having watched dystopian movies and people not connecting the dots, are people seeing it happen and are ignoring it, or making that conscious decision to not stand up or say anything, or do they just not see it?
A lot of them don't see it. Some people don't have the realization of history happening around them. That sounds weird to say, but some people honestly wouldn't realize that the Titanic is sinking until the water's around their ankles. There's people that are just like that. There are people in Germany who honestly didn't realize their government was slaughtering Jews. They weren't in a position, they just didn't want to see it, or weren't trying to see it. And they think to themselves, I should have done something. I should have said, any German you talk to, I talked to a bunch of Germans when I was living there, any one of them that was around back then would say the same goddamn thing. Oh, I didn't know. And really, none of you assholes knew, right? All those Jews not a goddamn one of you knew. I have watched probably, and I'm not exaggerating, several thousand interviews, because it's something I concern myself with, of Germans who were around back then, who lived near the sinners, who lived in the town of Auschwitz. as a dystopian, the reason dystopian films are thought so, people like watching them, I mean, sometimes the technology is cool, sometimes the actor is cool, sometimes the concept is cool, okay? But the idea is...
remember, at the end, it's a warning.
It's a warning. And the whole idea is that what you're trying to tell people is like, you're not too far removed from the guys watching the trains go by with all the Jews on board. Mm-hmm. Schindler's List was a history story, but it was also a warning. Because these people, these civilized, at the top of the food chain, really, if you want to look at it, in Europe, the Germans, turned into that. Is it so hard to believe that Americans wouldn't do the same thing? And Americans are so much more diverse than the Germans. The Germans are basically all white people, mm-hmm. and there's less than 15 million of them at the time. Well, there's 320 million of us, and from all over the place. And look at what we do to each other in Detroit, in Chicago, in Richmond, in Oakland, in Los Angeles, in Compton, in New York. Do you think for 1 second that if somebody, I don't know, like a government entity, all of a sudden tried to take guns from some places in Texas, that there wouldn't be a revolution immediately? I mean, think about that. There's Beto himself. Hell yeah, we're going to come for your AK-47s. Hell yeah, we're going to come to your house and take your AR-15s. In Texas? Really? How about in Georgia? Mississippi? Alabama? Michigan? Try it there. Detroit? Maybe. Florida? Try it in Florida. I dare you to try it in Florida. Because they can just... Any police officer has to be thinking to himself... Because if I was a police officer, and actually one of my neighbors is a police officer, and he's actually said, I'm out. Now, when a leadership starts telling us that, and President Biden has done nothing, except violate constitutional right after constitutional right after constitutional right. He's up the borders. He did what he did in Afghanistan and basically left hundreds of Americans. Anyone said there's 100 Americans there? Guys, there's a lot more than that. And thousands of Afghanis who supported us. Mm-hmm. Okay? Don't ask me how I know, but we left a shit ton of people back there, okay? Anytime you start looking at a dystopian movie that you watch, and I'll start just looking like dystopian realities, and leadership starts saying things like, we all have to take this, and we're all going to get locked into our rooms, and and hell yeah, we're going to come for your guns. I'm just saying, okay? I'm not an alarmist. I kind of don't think we're going to end up in World War III in the United States in the Civil War, okay? I kind of don't think that. But then again, I'm pretty sure there's people in 1855 that didn't think we'd end up in a civil war. Mm-hmm. Which, by the way, is 6 years before the actual Civil War started, in case you didn't know. So it's entirely possible that I'm incorrect, that something horrible is going to happen. Okay, I hope cooler heads prevail. But the Guns of August didn't, which is when World War I started. December 7th, 1941 came, and no one thought that was going to happen. Okay? So history has shown that these things are possible. History has not only shown they're possible, but they get worse and worse every time. And so I'm looking at history, and I'm looking at reality, and I'm looking at events going on around me. What am I to think? And so when you see a dystopian movie, when you read a dystopian novel, art and reality have always been have always been interlocked. They've always gone together. There's a reason for that. And so looking at history and looking at movies and looking at how they work together, because the movies are basically the projection, no pun intended, the projection of the thoughts and the ideas and the fears of the society on the screen for us to see. And the lessons we can get from them will help us or hinder us from making the right decisions.